In September 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt looked at the blueprints for a new class of cargo ship and made a face of disgust. He famously called it a dreadful-looking object and dubbed it the ugly duckling of the ocean. He was right. It was slow, boxy, and lacked the grace of a destroyer or the power of a battleship. But this ugly ship, the Liberty ship, would become the most important weapon of World War II. Without it, the tanks wouldn't have reached Russia, the fuel wouldn't have reached Britain, and the soldiers wouldn't have reached Normandy. This is the story of the greatest industrial miracle in history. How the US learned to build a massive ocean liner in just 4 days. It is also the story of a catastrophic engineering flaw that caused these ships to snap in half in cold water. We will analyze the welding revolution, the brittle fracture phenomenon, and how Henry Kaiser turned shipbuilding into a car factory. To understand the urgency, you have to look at the Tonnage War in the Atlantic in 1941 and 1942. German U-boats were sinking Allied merchant ships faster than the British and Americans could build them. In 1942 alone, U-boats sank over 1,600 Allied ships, sending nearly 8 million tons of supplies to the bottom of the ocean. The equation was simple mathematics. If you sink ships faster than you launch them, you lose the war. The Allies needed a ship that was simple enough to be built by unskilled labor and cheap enough to be considered disposable. They didn't need a ship that would last 20 years. They needed a ship that would last one voyage. The design selected was an obsolete British concept, adapted by the US Maritime Commission for mass production. It was 441 feet long, displaced 14,000 tons, and was powered by an old-fashioned steam engine because turbines were in short supply. The contract to build them was given to a man who had never built a ship in his life, Henry J. Kaiser. Kaiser was a construction magnate who had built the Hoover Dam and paved roads in Cuba. The naval establishment laughed at him, calling him a cement mixer who had no business in a shipyard. But Kaiser didn't view a ship as a piece of naval architecture. He viewed it as a construction project. He realized that the traditional method of shipbuilding, laying a keel and building up from the bottom, was too slow. It relied on skilled craftsmen working in a cramped space, waiting for one part to be finished before starting the next. Kaiser revolutionized the industry by applying the logic of the Ford assembly line to the shipyard. He introduced prefabrication. Instead of building the ship on the slipway, they built it in sections all over the yard. The bow was built in one area, the cabins in another, and the engine room in a third. Giant cranes would then lift these massive 50-ton sections and drop them into place like Lego bricks. This allowed thousands of workers to build different parts of the same ship simultaneously. It also allowed Kaiser to use unskilled labor, farmers, waiters, and housewives, who could be trained to do one specific task. The most critical technological shift was the move from riveting to welding. Traditional ships were held together by hundreds of thousands of steel rivets, each hammered in by hand. Riveting was slow, heavy, and required immense physical strength and years of training. Welding was fast, lighter, and could be taught to a new worker in 2 weeks. The Liberty ship was the first all-welded ship to be mass-produced on such a scale. This reduced the weight of the ship, saved steel, and dramatically sped up the assembly process. The results were staggering. Before the war, it took about 240 days to build a cargo ship of this size. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, took 244 days to build. But as the learning curve kicked in, the time dropped to 100 days, then 70 days, then 40 days. But Kaiser wanted to prove a point. He wanted to show the world the power of American industry. In November 1942, at the Richmond shipyards in California, he ordered a publicity stunt. He wanted to see how fast a ship could physically be assembled if all resources were focused on it. The keel of the SS Robert E. Peary was laid at 12:01 a.m. on a Sunday. By that evening, the bottom shell and the inner bottom were complete. By Monday, the bulkheads and the lower decks were welded into place. By Tuesday, the upper decks were installed, and the engine was lowered into the hull. By Wednesday, the masts were up, and the ship was being painted. On Thursday, roughly 4 days and 15 hours after the keel was laid, the ship was launched into the water. It was fully operational. The paint was still wet, but the steam pressure was up. The Germans simply didn't believe it. Nazi propaganda claimed the story was a Hollywood lie. They could not comprehend that a nation could build a complex machine faster than they could load a train. By 1943, the US was launching 3 Liberty ships every single day. The total fleet eventually numbered 2,610 ships, the largest production run of any ship design in history. But this speed came at a terrible price. The welding technology was new, and the science of metallurgy hadn't quite caught up with the speed of production. In the cold waters of the North Atlantic, a terrifying phenomenon began to occur. Liberty ships were literally snapping in half without warning. The most famous incident happened to the SS Schenectady in January 1943. The ship was brand new. It was sitting in calm water at the dock in Portland, Oregon. Suddenly, with a sound like a gunshot, the hull cracked from one side to the other, the bow and stern jackknifed upwards, and the ship settled into the mud. It hadn't hit a mine. It hadn't been torpedoed. It had just broken. The investigation revealed a fatal flaw in the steel itself: brittle fracture. The steel used for the Liberty ships was a grade that had a relatively high sulfur content. In warm water, the steel was ductile. It could bend and stretch under stress. But below a certain temperature, known as the ductile to brittle transition temperature, the steel became like glass. In the freezing Atlantic, the hull lost its ability to absorb the energy of waves. Furthermore, the welding created a continuous structure. In a riveted ship, a crack would stop when it hit the edge of a steel plate. The rivet hole acted as a fire break. In a welded ship, the hull is one single piece of metal. A crack that started in a bad weld could travel around the entire circumference of the ship at the speed of sound. Engineers scrambled to fix the problem without stopping production. They couldn't change the steel quality instantly, so they applied a Band-Aid solution. They riveted crack arrestors onto the hull, heavy steel straps bolted over the welds. If a crack started, it would hit the riveted strap and stop, preventing the ship from splitting in two. This fix worked reasonably well, but the reputation of the Liberty ship as expendable was cemented. Sailors called them Kaiser's coffins, or floating welds. Despite the flaws, the sheer volume of ships overwhelmed the U-boats. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, realized he had lost the tonnage war. No matter how many ships his submarines sank, the Americans were launching more. It was a victory of quantity over quality, of logistics over tactics. The Liberty ship also drove a massive social change in the United States. Because of the labor shortage, the shipyards opened their gates to women and African Americans. The image of Rosie the Riveter, or in this case, Rosie the Welder, was born in the hulls of Liberty ships. Women proved they could handle the heavy industrial work of welding and cutting steel. For African Americans, the shipyards offered the first real opportunity for industrial wages. Although the workforce was often segregated and tensions were high, it was the beginning of the integrated industrial workforce. The economic cost of the program was astronomical, $6 billion in 1940s money. But the ships paid for themselves by delivering the Lend-Lease supplies we discussed in previous videos. They carried the Studebaker trucks to Russia, the Sherman tanks to Britain, and the fuel to North Africa. A Liberty ship could carry 10,000 tons of cargo. That is equivalent to 300 railroad freight cars or 2,140 jeeps. Without this lift capacity, the arsenal of democracy would have been a factory without a delivery truck. After the war, the fate of the Liberty ships was a mix of scrap and survival. Many were sold to Greek and Norwegian shipping magnates like Aristotle Onassis. They formed the backbone of the modern global merchant marine fleet. If you bought a product shipped by sea in the 1950s or 60s, it likely came on a surplus Liberty ship. Hundreds of others were put into the Mothball fleet. They were anchored in rows in places like Suisun Bay, California, forming ghost fleets kept in reserve. They sat there for decades, rusting away, a silent monument to the industrial effort of the war. Today, only 2 operational Liberty ships remain, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien and the SS John W. Brown. When you walk through the Jeremiah O'Brien in San Francisco, you can see the hasty welds. You can feel the thinness of the steel and the crudeness of the finish. It feels less like a ship and more like a floating warehouse designed by a committee. The engine room is a steampunk maze of pistons and oil, a 19th century heart and a 20th century body. The Liberty ship represents the ultimate triumph of good enough. It wasn't fast, 11 knots. It wasn't safe, it cracked. It wasn't pretty, but it was available. And in war, availability is the best ability. The Germans built masterpieces like the Bismarck, which took 4 years and was sunk on its first mission. The Americans built disposable boxes that took 4 days and delivered the victory. Henry Kaiser proved that the principles of mass production could be applied to anything. He challenged the established priesthood of naval architects and won. The Liberty ship program taught the world a lesson in scaling. Complexity is the enemy of volume. By standardizing the design, using common parts and ignoring aesthetics, the US achieved the impossible. They turned the ocean into a conveyor belt. The Brittle Fracture failure also advanced the science of metallurgy. Because of the Liberty ships, we now understand how temperature affects steel at the molecular level. Every modern ship, bridge, and pipeline is safer because of the lessons learned from the cracking hulls of 1943. The ugly Duckling never became a swan, but it carried the weight of the free world on its back. So, when we analyze the victory of 1945, we shouldn't just look at the atomic bomb or the tank. We should look at the humble, rusty, welded cargo ship. It was the vessel that connected the factory to the front line. It proved that a war of attrition is won not by the genius of the design, but by the speed of the replacement. The Germans sank 1,600 ships. The Americans built 2,700. That mathematical disparity is the real story of World War II. The Liberty ship was a disposable tool for a disposable war, but its legacy is durable. The globalized trade network we live in today was built on its keel. Henry Kaiser didn't just build ships. He built the prototype for the modern industrial world, and he did it in 4 days, while the experts said it would take a year.